We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real.
Suburban women helped determine the 2020 election, but there's more to us than the headlines would have you believe.
The suburbs aren't a homogenous sea of white people in perfect houses. Real change is happening in the suburbs, and we have things to say.
When women share their personal stories, walls come down and barriers are broken.
Welcome to the Suburban Women Problem, a podcast from Red, Wine, and Blue.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Rachel Vindman.
I'm Amanda Weinstein.
I'm Jasmine Clark.
And you're listening to the Suburban Women Problem. Welcome back, everyone. A lot of our kids have gone back to school in the past couple weeks, right in the middle of this surging Delta variant. And that means high stress levels for all of us. But it's not just moms that are stressing now. I think we're all pretty burned out from feeling so close to the light at the end of the tunnel to now feeling like we're right back to where we were months ago. So we're going to talk about the pandemic. What are we worried about? What makes us angry? Later on, we're going to answer some listener questions. And lucky for us, we have a microbiologist right here on the podcast with us, Dr. Jasmine Clark.
Oh my goodness, I get an opportunity to put my microbiologist hat on today. So I'm really excited and I really look forward to your questions. But I do want to give this disclaimer because I think it's important. While I am a health expert, I am not your health expert. So while I have no problem answering your questions, please always consult with your doctor about any specific medical concerns you have.
Great advice. And after our listener questions, I get to sit down with Dr. Leana Nguyen, a physician, public health expert, and the author of a new book, Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health. So Jasmine, can you please tell us about addressing your school board, your local school board last week?
Yes, absolutely. So it was actually a pretty interesting experience. I addressed them in my capacity as a state representative, but also in my capacity as a person who is in microbiology and also as a mom of a student in our public school system. I specifically, thank them for mandating masks despite there being very loud vocal protest against mask mandates by a vocal minority, but a very raucous one that can really kind of jar you. But I thank them for their courage during this very, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess in these dangerous times, but also just in these very political charged times.
And uncertain. I think it's a lot of uncertainty, and it's been my experience that they really prey on that uncertainty and take advantage of it.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, and so I thank them for their courage, but then I also provided some further suggestions on how we can make our COVID-19 safety protocols even stronger. And a lot of those suggestions apparently ruffled some feathers.
Do you think because it was coming from you or because it wasn't what they wanted to hear?
I think it's both. So, I'm standing up there as a state representative, which means it's partisan to them. I'm a Democrat, so they assume that I'm speaking as a Democrat and that I don't have skin in the game. But like I said, I'm a mother of a student. So yes, I was wearing my state representative hat, but I was also wearing my mother hat. And, I was just making simple suggestions like the most vulnerable time of the day right now, in my opinion, is lunchtime for a lot of our students. And I provided some suggestions on how we could strengthen safety around lunchtime. I also just, asked them to take part in surveillance testing because we can't fight what we don't see. And we've got to know what we're dealing with so we can push back against it. And so I think surveillance testing is really important.
Wait, what is surveillance testing? I've never heard that term.
It's basically testing everyone. So right now, our numbers in our school are pretty much based on self-reporting. You feel sick, you go get a test, and then you test positive and you let the school know, oh, my kid test positive or I tested positive if you work at the school. And that's pretty much what we're relying on. But
unless you're in Texas,
or
if you're in Texas, you don't have to do that.
Exactly.
You don't.
And that's
you
the
have
problem.
to report if your child has lice, but you don't have to report if your child has COVID.
Exactly. And so these are the types of things that give the virus an advantage. And so we want to push back on that by just knowing what we're dealing with, really knowing how the virus is spreading. We can't do it without the data.
You know, I want to, you mentioned the most vulnerable time being lunchtime. In my family, my husband's twin brother lives a few doors down. He has a daughter who's in the same grade as my daughter at school. We have made the decision that we are going to pick up the girls every day at lunch and eat either in the car or hopefully, if it's nice enough, to sit outside. There are some tables outside, and it's very complicated. It's very disruptive, but our school district inexplicably is not following CDC guidelines, and lunchtime is
a free-for-all.
Yeah, I mean, there's some performative stuff, I would say, but it's not meaningful. Jasmine, can you explain what the CDC guidelines are for lunchtime?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the CDC says in a K through 12 environment, you know, you need to have multiple layers of protection. One of those layers is mask. Another layer is social distancing. 6 feet if you can, 3 feet if you can. If you can't do 3 feet, then you need to have what's called cohorting. Cohorting is basically keeping the same group of students around each other the entire day and limiting exposure to other people as much as possible. And so eating outside or cohorting is the best way. Eating outside would allow you the distance and at least a lot more fresh air, a lot more open space versus eating in a cafeteria where, again, you're going to have this situation where students are around the most other students in their day, and they also don't have a mask on. And for elementary schools, they're also not vaccinated.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say, so for cohorting, you want to be in your classroom, right? That's what you're saying by cohorting, that you should not be in a cafeteria. So we cannot do lunch outside in the wintertime in Ohio, right?
But what are you guys doing now?
That's a good question. I did not think about the lunchroom until you guys brought it up.
My microbiologist sister-in-law is the one who brought it up for our family. I did not really think of it either. I'm going to be honest. It was not on my radar until she brought it up. She did a lot of the legwork for our family, like sort of asking the questions. The answers were pretty bad. I'll just be honest. And a lot of times, I have a type A personality. So when I'm stressed, I like to have like redundant controls, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something. So perhaps this is what the school district is doing. I don't know. But a friend of mine sent me an email from her school district. They listed the things and the steps they're taking. And as I read that email, and by the way, it's from Clarksville, Tennessee. If my blue state and my very blue county and probably school district reflects that, had sent me an email that told me all the steps they were taking, I would feel so much better. But there has been almost no communication about what they're doing, except that inexplicably, we only have a 10-minute window to drop off our children every morning. And that is not helpful. So Amanda, have you received anything about what your school district is doing? Because you guys had school last year. So
we did. Yeah. So we don't have a mask mandate, but we did get the option of a mask only class, which I actually like. If we cannot get a mask mandate in school, then at least I have a classroom where I know all of the class will be masked, including the teacher.
Cohorting.
Yeah, and so it's a little bit cohorting, but I honestly did not. And so that was the main thing I paid attention to, and we chose a mask classroom, but I did not think about lunchtime until you guys brought it up. And I was like, oh, I did not pay attention to what they said about lunchtime. Even with the mask class, a lot of parents I know didn't choose a mask class because it made it sound like you were stuck in a mask class all year, even if your kid gets vaccinated next month. which I understand. And the email wasn't very clear.
The problem with sending a child into an unmasked class with a mask is that we have actual data that shows that masks work best when the source of infection is masked and not the receiver. I am always very concerned that a lot of people don't understand and they kind of just think, well, as long as I have on my mask, I'm protected. But really, it boils down to collectively everyone having on a mask in order for them to really be effective the way they are supposed to work.
Which is, we think, how my husband got it back in December, because he wore a mask, but he went to the state house in Ohio where news broke that Republicans had tested positive for COVID, still went to the state house and didn't wear a mask. And a bunch of legislators got it, even Republican and Democrat who wore a mask still got it because the person who had it did not wear a mask.
Right. We have data. Yes.
Yeah. And so my biggest concern really says I wanted a mask class because, yes, I can send my kid, in a mask and they will be comfortable. Everyone else will have a mask on. But also, I don't want them sent home for 2 weeks. I don't want that phone call saying, hey, come pick up your kid for the next 2 weeks and have fun in that new shutdown you're going to be in. No, thank you.
Hi. I know that Jasmine said earlier that, she is a healthcare expert, but not your healthcare expert. And I just also want to add an additional disclaimer that we will not be covering the cost of anyone's Xanax or anything else from the anxiety that we might be causing from this podcast. So
I think that the best thing that we can do is be informed about what's going on in our schools.
Absolutely.
And know the risk.
The thing.
And so you're right, Rachel. Like, schools telling you exactly what they're doing is the minimum that we can expect during this time. And then, after that, at least whatever decision you're making it with information instead of going into things blind.
I want to know if my teacher's vaccinated. I feel like that is reasonable for me to know. I kind of feel like since I'm in the math class, she is, but I don't know. I feel like that's perfectly fair to tell students whether or not your teacher's vaccinated.
Here in Georgia, our governor actually signed an executive order to make it to where we can't ask. So prior to that, we could ask, but he went out of his way to make it where we cannot ask. We cannot be equipped with that very simple information that just would have given some parents peace of mind to know the situation that they're sending their children into. And I don't know what it is with these people who are decision makers, who are going out of their way to make things difficult for parents. But that's why we need more people in office that actually have school-age children so they can actually understand what parents are going through, and that the things that we're asking for, we're not asking for, their blood type, and, we're not asking for their ancestry.com results. We just want to know, what is the situation that my child will be in for 7 to 8 hours of their day?
I think that's fair. So New York City just mandated COVID-19 vaccinations for more than 140,000 education department employees, offering no option to be tested instead. Basically, get vaccinated, which in certain industries like education, where you will be dealing with a bunch of, for me, all of my unvaccinated kids, I think that's perfectly fair.
It's more than fair. People look to elected officials and leaders in the community to make sound decisions based on science and reason and facts. And when they make the decisions just based on what they think people want to hear, it erodes trust in them doing the right thing.
Rachel, it sounds like you're frustrated.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Jasmine, how are you feeling?
I'm also frustrated. It's just me and my daughter here. So my son lives with his dad, so it's me and my daughter here. So if I get really, really sick, I've got to make arrangements to make sure that she's taken care of. But not just that, because of my medical history, even though I'm vaccinated, if I get COVID, I am very likely to suffer some very bad effects from that, specifically stroke. And that scares me. What does that mean for my daughter? I don't want to put that on her. I don't want to give her the anxiety of having to think about this. And so, to y'all's point, I look at this as us against the virus. But somewhere along the way, it became us against them. And the virus is taking advantage of the fact that we're fighting each other instead of fighting the virus.
You're exactly right.
Honestly, I don't feel frustrated anymore or even angry. I just am at the point where I think I'm probably burned out. We've had the episode on burnout. I think I'm there. I have just very few F's left to give. I've tried really hard. We've done the shutdown. I've homeschooled my kids. We didn't put them in programs, right? That all got canceled for the kids over the summer. I'm done with the F's, right? I don't have any more to give. I gave them all away.
So what are we going to do? It's really hard because I don't know where to go. I have a sister-in-law who I dearly love. She is very hesitant to get the vaccine. She is hesitant because she's afraid she'll have a reaction. And I've tried to talk to her. I know others have tried to talk to her, and I feel like the bottom line is I haven't been successful. And I don't know. I don't know what to do. That's a very personal, anecdote or story. But in general, I do think there are quite a few people like her. And I hope that, Pfizer's recent full FDA approval will change people's minds. I'm not particularly hopeful that that's going to happen. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us what you think about that.
I think that people were using that as their excuse.
Absolutely.
But then
me too.
The goalpost is going to move as it has been this entire pandemic. People will find an excuse or a reason or, anything to not do what they don't want to do.
They don't even have to find it.
Yeah.
People will find it for them and then they'll just repeat it.
Exactly.
There's a whole marketing team that's going to come up with reasons for them. Here's a menu. Here's 8 reasons. Just choose one and stick with it until you can't use that one.
Tweet it all day. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so I think that the people who were I'm just waiting for it to get approved. Now the next thing will be, well, it got approved too fast. Or, this is just the government trying to find a way to mandate. Yeah, they just want to mandate things. So that's why they approved it.
Yeah, so there's a New York Times article right now about who the unvaccinated are and has tons of data on who's not getting vaccinated. Which was super fun for me to dig into. But actually, one of the most common reasons is they're worried about the side effects.
So when we talk about vaccine hesitancy, I think it's important for us to acknowledge some people's fears.
Yeah.
It's okay to be fearful. It's okay to be skeptical. But the effects of getting COVID, for some, 9 months later, they're still feeling those effects.
If you look at who the anti-vaxxers were before Trump, right? So I looked at some of this data pre-Trump, and it wasn't political. You actually had anti-vaxxers, small percent, but on both sides. But now, more than half of the people who won't get vaccinated are anti-vaxxers, and now they tend to be white, they tend to be Republican, they tend to be age 30 to 49, they tend to be less educated, and they tend to be evangelicals, right? And this is all because it's been so politicized. But there are still people who are not vaccinated who are not anti-vaxxers, right? They're hesitant because they're worried about side effects, or they just haven't done it yet, right? So it reminds me of voting, because I hear politicians all the time talk about oh, you just got to get up and do it, right? You just got to, make the time. This is your duty. But really, when you're working multiple jobs, you have no paid leave, you have children to take care of, and no childcare, voting is very hard, and it's not a matter of you're just being lazy. And I kind of think the same with the vaccine.
So I think, we got some great listener questions, and we should definitely get to those and answer some of them. So are you ready, Jasmine?
I think I'm ready. This feels like the rapid fire, but it's like me.
Rapid fire, but science. Okay. Yes. Well, this is a question from Taylor in Arizona. I'm a teacher and we're back to school in person. Some schools in our area have already had to quarantine whole classrooms. Luckily, ours hasn't yet, but is there any data yet on the difference between schools with 95% plus mask compliance versus, say, 50% or 25%? Actually, I know my sister-in-law had this question as well, and she was unable to find data. Have you?
I was just about to say, unfortunately, we don't have the data. And the reason why goes back to what I talked about earlier when it comes to surveillance testing. We really are not collecting all of this information the way we should. And then in all experiments, in all, when we're gathering data, you have to have controls. And the problem is with the lunchtime situation and other parts of the day where students might not be masked, you don't necessarily have a way to control for that. What I can say, however, is that a lot of the school systems that have mask optional have had to shut down and go to virtual, either the entire system or entire schools or entire grades.
But we do have data. We do have data on the effectiveness of masks.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Well, this is a question. I just really feel this question. It's from Jenny in Texas. And she says, I'm worried that things are going to get so much worse, especially in red states like Texas. What can I do other than move out of my home state?
Oh, that's a hard question. I mean, it's hard because you have governors and other people in Texas and across the United States, honestly, that have taken the cover my ears and scream la 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 and wait and hope that the virus just goes away. And that's just not how this works. There is hope, though, and that the pushback that parents and others in the community have done has been effective. So school boards are basically saying, I don't care what the governor says, we're going to mandate masks for these students who cannot be vaccinated. We have to, pull out all the stops at this point. Anything that you can do, just try to do it. What you should not do, though, is retreat to your corner and give up. Just the same way we can't give up against this virus, we cannot give up against people who seem hell-bent on just trying to will the virus away as if they have the ability to do that, and they don't.
I think that's a good point. So change it, right? Get those mask mandates and be creative, like have new school uniforms that include a mask, which I know one district did, which was super cool and clever, right? Change it. And a lot of people are. All right. So this is a question from Katie in Ohio. Should my kids mask on the playground? They're outside, but they're all over each other and touching the same stuff. Should I make them wear masks? So I definitely have this question for my daughter too, because she's in a mask class, but they don't have to wear masks on the playground when they're outside.
I will just say this. There have been reports of spread in outdoor environments. If distancing is not added to the outdoor environment, then yes, spread can happen. When you're dealing with the Delta variant, because of how contagious it is, it changed the game a little bit. And so while I personally feel a lot safer outside than I do inside, the truth is, even when you're outside, you should be distancing if you're not wearing a mask. And so I say that to say that while on the playground, it might be okay, but it is definitely not 100% safe just because they're outside.
But it sounds like it's more about how close they are and not the touching of the playground equipment. Is that right?
Yes, this is more about closeness, although kids do tend to touch their faces a little bit more. So we've also got to consider that they're sharing equipment, touching their faces, and that's just giving the virus access. So we do have to also be mindful of that as well.
Our school is not allowing playground usage, actually.
Oh, they aren't?
No, we didn't last year, and they're not allowing it this year either.
At the end of the day, wearing a mask outside, especially if it's really hot, is not very comfortable. And so I can understand kids, kind of resisting having the mask on. I think at that point, that's when you take the information you have and decide how much risk you want to take.
And there are a lot of good explanations for regular people like me who don't know any of this on YouTube.
You can find Jasmine Clark on youtube.com. You're already throwing down knowledge I did not know. So this was one of my favorite questions. So this is a question from Andrew in Ontario. We'd like to point out you don't have to be a woman to listen to Suburban Women Problem.
Or in the United States.
That's true. Or in the United States. You can be a problem from wherever and whoever you are. How should we think about the end game here? Is COVID just going to be around forever?
So this question is one that I get a lot where people are like, what's going on? Like, I feel like we're never going to ever get past this pandemic. And that's pretty much a very defeatist attitude that will be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The truth is, if everyone were to do all the things that we need to do in order to stop the spread of this virus, we could get past it. The end game really has to be that we get the virus under control before we get another variant that completely escapes the vaccine. And then we are back at square one where we were at the beginning of 2020. No one wants that. So we really need to collectively understand that the longer we let this linger, the longer we feel defeated and decide to throw down our shields and throw down our weapons, the more likely this virus wins and a lot of people die in the process.
So if you're pro-life, maybe you should get the vaccine, evangelicals.
Exactly.
And with that, we are going to get another dose of medical knowledge. I'm going to be sitting down with physician and public health authority Dr. Leana Nguyen. Stick around, everyone. My interview with Dr. Nguyen is coming up after the break.
Does the return to school send you down a rabbit hole of panic? Are your kids asking questions you don't know how to answer? Then join us this Tuesday, August 31st, for Anxiety Spiral Back to School Edition. The event will be live on Red, Wine, and Blue's Facebook page, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll be joined by child psychologist Dr. Deborah Paris, who will answer your questions about how to talk to your kids about what's going on. Don't panic alone. Panic with us.
Our guest today is a physician and public health professor, a contributing columnist for the Washington Post, and a CNN medical analyst. She served as Baltimore's health commissioner for 4 years, and she's the author of a new book, Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health. Dr. Leana Nguyen, welcome to the Suburban Women Problem.
Thank you, Rachel. Great to join you. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, it's an honor actually to speak to you. I see you on TV all the time. Could you tell us a little bit about how your early experiences, including immigrating to the U.S. when you were 8 years old, influenced your desire to go into the medical field?
Yeah, I wrote about this in Lifelines. Actually, I hadn't really intended to, because Lifelines was meant to be a celebration of public health. And I wanted to talk about the work that we did in Baltimore to address the opioid epidemic and reduce infant mortality in our city. But I also ended up talking about my own experience because, in a sense, it's a story of public health as well. My parents and I immigrated from China just before I turned 8. We initially lived in a little town in Utah and then moved to the LA area. And even though my parents, I think like many immigrants, they worked multiple jobs. My father delivered newspapers and washed dishes at a restaurant. My mother was working in a video store while becoming a teacher. She eventually ended up teaching in 2nd grade, but we still had trouble making ends meet. There were times when we couldn't make our rent and we were evicted. We depended on Medicaid for our healthcare. I also saw, and I opened the book actually with an experience that I had when I was about 10, where a neighbor child died in front of me because he had asthma, and his grandmother was too afraid to call for help because the family was undocumented and she was afraid of what might happen if she called the authorities. And so to your question, Rachel, those early experiences very much shaped my understanding of how health and healthcare need to be understood as the fundamental human rights that they are. But that is not the reality in our country, where people are not valued the same.
Wow. You often say that public health saved your life today. You just didn't know it. Could you tell us a little bit more what you mean by that?
Absolutely. There is the saying that public health saved your life today. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
That public health, in a sense, works when it's invisible, because the work that we do is about prevention.
Right.
But then if nobody can see the work that you do, it often becomes the first thing on the chopping block when it comes to the budget. And I think it's important. And again, one of the reasons why I wrote Lifelines was to try to put the face on public health, to illustrate what it looks like when it's working well. I mean, I mentioned our opioid program. We were able to save over 3,000 lives in a 3-year period because we were able to increase treatment and get naloxone, the opioid antidote, to every resident in our city. Our Healthy Babies program closed the disparity between Black and white infant mortality by over 50% and reduced infant mortality in our city by 38% in a 7-year period. All of that is the life-saving, life-changing work of public health, but we need to make that case actively every day.
Absolutely. And there are just so many people who don't understand that there are those needs in our country, I'm afraid. So thank you for the work you do in that regard. In the midst of this pandemic, public health officials, especially women in public health, have received a lot of hate. As a former health commissioner, what has it been like seeing that happening?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I'm glad that you're asking about it and raising awareness of this. I think that, what has happened, of course, is that we're in a very polarized and very divided country, and public health and very basic measures like mask wearing and vaccinations have somehow been inserted into the middle of culture wars instead of understood as the health interventions that they are. And it is the classic blame the messenger. People don't want to hear difficult messages, and they are taking it out on the individuals who are trying to do that work. And I'm so disheartened and so frustrated by what we're seeing. I mean, dozens of health officials have been scapegoated and made to leave their jobs. People have been harassed at home. Their children and in their schools have been harassed. I mean, I can tell you myself, as someone in the public talking about sometimes unpopular and difficult issues, I think it's the combination, you're right, of being a woman talking about these issues, and in my case, being a Chinese American, I think has the combination of that somehow sets some people off in a way that is really concerning about what this means for not just this pandemic, but but future public health threats too.
I can relate to a lot of that, and I'm so sorry. One of the biggest problems I think we're seeing as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic is that medical science, as you said, is being turned into a partisan issue, filtered through this lens of Democrat versus Republican. Do you have any thoughts on how we might change that?
It's a great question. And I do want to also thank you for your courage and resilience and grit, and your family too, for everything that you have gone through. And again, things that we shouldn't have to go through, but because we're in the position that we are, we do our best. And I think that in a way is how I would answer this question as well, that we shouldn't be in this position, that masks and vaccines and other things and public health in general are politicized and made into partisan talking points instead of understood as life-saving issues. I mean, I really struggle with this when it comes to masking in schools, for example. I mean, we wouldn't put 20 to 30 or more unvaccinated, unmasked adults into a room with one another for the entire day. Why are we doing that for our children? Why are we taking away one of the few but powerful interventions that we have when it comes to masking? I mean, it's I could go on about this all day, about how we have really, in this country, really failed our children during this pandemic. But to give you a direct answer, and maybe one that might not be expected in this case, I actually think that one way for us to try to depoliticize these issues is to not talk about them, is to not emphasize them, rather. And what I mean is public health and the idea of public health has now been equated with COVID. And to some people, that's fine. As in, I think there are a lot of people who really love Dr. Fauci and who love the work that public health has been doing and think it's great to be talking about COVID and public health. But for other people who will have this immediate visceral reaction if you talk about public health, let's not focus on it. Let's talk about all the other work that public health does that's so important. Let's talk about lead poisoning and home remediation to prevent lead poisoning. Let's talk about food access and getting food for vulnerable seniors. Let's talk about home visitation programs and breastfeeding classes for postpartum families. I mean, these are things that we can all rally behind. And I think we need a campaign, if you will, to revitalize public health and to make sure that people don't understand public health just as quarantining, masking, testing, things that have unfortunately become in the middle of these ideological culture wars.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really great answer, because I think if we could just pivot to something else and point out the many successes of public health, that's a great place to go with that. Like, what are some weaknesses or flaws in the public health system that, have been sort of exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic and how we've dealt with it?
Oh, I think we've seen so many. Although I will also say we've seen a lot of great successes in our system as well. As in,
Sure.
I think we've seen, for example, the resilience of our healthcare systems and the innovation and the persistence, too, of our doctors, nurses, pharmacists, frontline folks, too. And then we've also seen our scientists who have collaborated around the world to get us these life-saving vaccines. I mean, that's all work that's done very well. But I think that we have also seen failures when it comes to lack of focus on science, lack of national leadership. We have seen that disparities have been unveiled during COVID-19. COVID did not create disparities, right? I mean, it's not that the virus is somehow discriminating itself. It's that these disparities have always been there, but they have been exacerbated. They have been unmasked because of the pandemic. And we've also seen then that unless we are intentional about addressing these disparities, they are only going to get worse.
Right. Yeah. I have to say, I hung on every word of your recent piece in the Washington Post about tips for sending your children back to school safely. It's a particular interest of mine. A lot of parents are sending their kids back to school without mask mandates. Fortunately, I'm not in that position, and I'm still anxious. If virtual school is an option, should we even risk sending our kids to school in person?
I think we're at the stage in the pandemic where everybody has to make the right decision for themselves and their families. There are a lot of families that do not have the option of virtual school because maybe they're working parents who, we know that school is also a form of childcare, right? It's important.
Right, absolutely.
And there are also kids who have really suffered because of not having in-person instruction and who need in-person schooling for their cognitive, emotional well-being. In addition, there are also other types of circumstances. For example, I have a son who turns 4 next week as of the time that we're talking. His preschool, I'm so fortunate, is one that is following all of the CDC guidelines. Is there a risk? Yes, but that risk is much reduced. I feel very comfortable sending him back to preschool, and I think it depends on that. And then I would also say it depends on people's medical circumstances too. As in, if, for example, if somebody lives at home with an elderly family member who has severe immunocompromise, that might push them more if they have an option to do virtual schooling versus if they are not in that circumstance. What I would say is that I don't want parents to feel like we have no agency. Even if your school, and obviously this should not be the case, but even if your school is not requiring masks, you can still choose to have your child wear a mask. And I would also encourage parents to talk to other parents in your class, in your child's class. Maybe you can all make a pact that you will let one another know if there's a positive case. You will all be wearing masks. Also get a high quality mask, at least a 3-ply surgical mask, or if you have an older child who is comfortable with it, a KN95 or N95. The one more thing about this is I think so many of us focus on what happens in school. And that's very important. But so many of the transmission cases in children are what happens in extracurricular activities and in social activities as well. And so know that risk is cumulative. I think sometimes parents can think, well, my child is going to school, so I might as well also be doing these things. That's not the right way of thinking about it. Think about what is the most essential. If in-person schooling is the most essential, cut other aspects of risk. So don't do the pizza party indoors. Don't do the indoor birthday party. Don't do the sleepover. Cut out those things. Move them outdoors. But then keep school because that's the most essential.
Oh, that's really, really great advice and so practical. What would you say to people who are still hesitating to get vaccinated or who don't want themselves or their kids to have to wear a mask?
Well, I would have different questions or different ways of responding depending on, and also depending on who they are. I think that there is a individual answer that I would give to people, as well as a policy answer, and they're actually totally different. On an individual level, I think it's important to approach people with compassion and understanding, and to understand what is motivating this. And I actually think that a lot of what's preventing people from getting vaccinated is fear. They may not know, they may have concerns about side effects, they may have heard certain things from social media. Also, they might be in an environment where nobody around them is vaccinated. And so there's a fear of the unknown. And I think then we can address these concerns. Individuals who do not mask, typically they're using the argument of, well, this does not affect you, why should you care? This is my choice. And I think it is important from a policy perspective to then say, it actually is something that affects other people too. And vaccination is similar, that you, on a policy level, you have agency and choice to decide for yourself in private. But if you're going to go out in public, you should not have the right to also infect my unvaccinated children. There is also, I think, this understanding of liberty and freedom has really gone askew in all of this. There should also be our freedom to not get sick and die from COVID-19. That's important too.
Yeah, freedom is a responsibility of all of us. And I think it's good to remember that. With freedom comes responsibility. And we need to remember we're all in this country together. If
there's anything that we've seen during this pandemic, it's that we have a mutual obligation to one another, that we're in this together. And I think that that's actually a lot of why I wrote Lifelines too, to talk about how public health, in a way, we're all on the front lines of public health. We are in this together.
I completely agree. On that note, let's lighten it up a little bit and jump into some lighter rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
So I bet you have a lot of stressful days. What do you do at the end of the day to unwind?
Well, two things, a little bit different from one another. One is not necessarily always unwinding. I have two little kids, so I have the son who's almost 4, and I also have my own pandemic baby, which I also wrote about in the book, because
I saw pictures. Yeah.
So my baby is now 16 months old, and I'm so fortunate that she is such a happy baby. So part of unwinding is playing with the kids. The almost 4-year-old is in the three-nager stage. I didn't know that was a thing. I knew about terrible twos. No one told me about three-nagers, but he just flushed both pairs of our family car keys down the toilet. So that hanging out with him is not always relaxing.
But it's different. So there is that.
Right. It's exhausting.
Oh my.
But
yes. Wow.
Well, the other thing that I've actually started doing in the last few months is I never learned how to swim. And I decided as of 3 months ago that I was going to learn. And so that's the other thing that I've been doing to try to unwind, although right now, staying afloat and not drowning is not always the most, not always the most calming as well.
Sure. But that's great. That's really wonderful. What is your favorite thing about living in Baltimore?
Oh, I love the people. I was fortunate to come to the city to be the health commissioner, even though I'm no longer working for the city and no longer have a real reason to live in the city. My husband and I just really love it here, and we made such amazing friends. There are so many people really dedicated to the city and to one another, and we found a wonderful home here that we're proud to be raising our kids here in Baltimore.
Great. It's a lovely city. What is your favorite comfort food of choice?
Boba tea. I love boba tea. Somehow there's something about the tapioca that's like really chewy when it's done just right, when it's soft but chewy, that I really like.
Nice. What is a movie or TV show that's been on your watch list for a long time, but you just can't get around to it because you have 2 small children and a really important job?
Let me think of what. I've heard that The Queen's Gambit is really good, and it's been on our watch list.
Okay.
Not that my husband and I are big chess players, but we are really excited to see it one day, hopefully soon.
I haven't watched it either. So my husband did, but I didn't watch it. So let me know how it is.
Okay.
So there are many movies and TV shows about doctors. Are there any inaccuracies that you see all the time that just drive you up the wall?
I am sure this is the same for people watching law sitcoms or other things, but they always have so much going on in their lives. I mean, when I was in residency, I barely had time to go to work and come home and sleep. Like there wasn't all this trauma, relationships and mystery and friendships. And I mean, they're just, yeah, I don't know how they have time for all these things. And I think I always look at these sitcoms and say, and think, wow, your life is so much more exciting.
So what is something that your kids listen or watch that you enjoy also?
I actually love a lot of their, my son at least, the stuff that he's watching. I think because I didn't grow up in the U.S. initially during this stage in his life, I didn't have access to this growing up. I mean, Winnie the Pooh, which he loves, is amazing. We also recently watched The Incredibles together. I don't know if that was really age appropriate, but I really liked it.
Okay, well, that is the end of our rapid fire questions. You did very well.
Okay, good.
But tell us where people can find your book. Remind us the name and where they can purchase it.
Absolutely. My book is Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health in 3 components. The first is immigration, becoming a doctor. The second is working in Baltimore. And the third, because I actually wrote the book prior to COVID. And then my publisher said what every author wants to hear, which is you got to write it over. Not completely, but you can't write a book about public health without talking about COVID. And so the third part is about COVID. And the last chapter is actually called COVID Comes Home, because I also talked about how prior to vaccines became available, my husband and both kids came down with COVID as well. And so another chapter that we never thought that we would have to be writing. But in any case, it should be in most bookstores. I hope. If it's not, then, try Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. And oh, and I have a newsletter with the Washington Post that is actually launching tomorrow as of the time that we're talking. So that's something else that people can look.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to sign up for that immediately. And again, really thank you for that article that you wrote for Washington Post about sending kids back to school. There's a lot of great information in there that everyone should read. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're very busy and we really appreciate the expertise that you were able to give us today.
Of course. And thank you for your wonderful work. I look forward to hearing many more of your podcasts and episodes going forward. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Doctor.
Rachel, your interview with Dr. Wen was amazing. I love that we are really taking this seriously and bringing the real powerhouses when it comes to public health onto the podcast so people can really be informed.
I always appreciate good information. All right, we got to end on a happy note.
Yes.
I think, Jasmine, we need to hear your toast to joy.
So my toast to joy this week is actually students standing up for themselves. So I talked about how I went to my school board meeting and there was a lot of public comment. They have 30 people come up and do public comment. And the students were the first to do their comments. And I just loved how much they advocated for themselves. And so while I did get some boos and jeers during my, comments to the school board from people who are just uninformed and frankly just rude, I loved seeing the students actually stand up and say, y'all are supposed to be the adults in the room, but you are trying to make decisions for us and you're not even talking to us. And so it was wonderful to see. I hope to see more of it. And I can't wait for those kids to vote because I know that they have so much potential.
I love that. So we had a number of students come to our school board meetings and talk about DEI. And every single student that came to speak to the school board was supporting diversity, equity, inclusion. Not one student spoke against it. And I think that really says a lot about our students and really about DEI and our country and politics and a lot of it.
They get it. The kids are going to lead us all out of this, I hope, because we don't seem to be doing a great job.
I hope so too. So Rachel, what's your toast to joy this week?
My toast to joy is my tentative return to normal. I think this has been my toast a couple of times. This is a whole different. I mean, we were returning to normal with a vaccine. Now we're returning to normal more in a more difficult time. But we have recognized the importance of our children going to school, as long as it's safe to do so, and learning in a classroom. So kids are going back to school. Yay. And it's not what we hoped for and what we thought it would look like, but it's still happening. And I think it is worth celebrating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we were mostly in school last year, and we fought hard for it. And this is one place where the economists initially were very much with the medical community, like shut down, mandates. And then the economists wrote an article like, at some point the economists might veer. And I feel like last school year is when the economists like, no, we do need to be in school. Masks, but in school. So I'm so glad we are veering towards the in school. I wish there was more masks, but we can celebrate the in school. So let's celebrate the in school.
Yes.
And cross our fingers.
And what is your toast of joy, Amanda?
So my toast of joy, especially on this episode, I feel like had to be for the medical community who, oh my gosh, they're clearly more gracious and I think forgiving than I am. I can't imagine being put through this again with hospitals filled with mostly unvaccinated people when it was avoidable this time. I can't imagine what it must be like for them, but from all the medical people I know, they are doing it with a smile on their face. They are saving people's lives, even if they weren't going to save themselves. And I just can't say enough about our medical community, and I'm amazed at what they do every day. And also, I'm sorry we're putting you in this situation again.
Yeah, I hate it so much for them, but I am so appreciative of them. I work at Emory School of Nursing, so a lot of the people who are out there on the front lines used to be my students. Aww. And so, I know their hearts and I know that they're doing this because they absolutely want to. And so, they're amazing. They're still heroes. Like, they are definitely still heroes through all of this.
Yes. Well, that is the perfect note to end on. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. We will see you again on another episode of The Suburban Women Problem.
The Suburban Women Problem was created by Red, Wine, and Blue. Our executive producer is Beverly Batt. Our producer and editor is Amy Thorstensen, and our video producer is Ashley Hufford. If you're ready to be part of the Suburban Women Problem, head over to redwine.blue and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss a thing.